So yeah, good to see you all. So that text, the Shambhala Warrior Mind Training, which actually kind of emerged from one of those green retreats at Buddhafield. It was actually the sort of notes from the retreat, which I wrote up on the train on the way home, and they ended up just sort of came out in that form, and it's nice to know that it's sort of being used in that way. So this evening, I just wanted to focus on one verse from that, which is the one, staying open, staying grounded. Know that the deep forces of nature will come to the aid of those who defend the earth. Okay. Staying open, staying grounded. Know that the deep forces of nature will come to the aid of those who defend the earth. So yeah, we can, we can practice the Dharma. We can practice in nature. We can do what we think we need to do to be advocates for the earth, to defend the earth, to be defenders of rivers and oceans and forests and so on. But is there a sort of deeper connection that we can tap into? Is there a kind of wisdom and strength in nature that we might draw from? Particularly in relation to our sort of Buddhist practice, or is Buddhist practice possibly a way of accessing that level of strength? So in a way, that's what I'd like to explore a bit tonight, and invite us all to explore. I'm very conscious there's a lot of Buddha fielders here, and a lot of you might have more experience of this than I do, and that's fine. So let's see this as a sort of sharing of experience of practicing in nature. So I must say, I think I do remember writing that particular verse and being conscious that in a way it was an expression of faith rather than something that I could sort of prove in a kind of intellectually certain way. But nevertheless, it feels true. It feels true that somehow that connection with the earth gives us a kind of strength and wisdom that helps us in our endeavours, whatever they might be. And I seem to remember, because it was quite a few years ago now, but I seem to remember what was in my mind at the time was the example of the Buddha himself. Possibly I think probably most of you are aware of the Enlightenment myth, where the earth goddess, at the time when the Buddha, on the very cusp of becoming the Buddha, is challenged by Mara, who says, by what right, who do you think you are to be standing on the very threshold of Buddhahood, to occupy that space? And at that point, of course, the Buddha reaches out and touches the earth lightly with his right hand, and the earth goddess arises and says, "I will be his witness." And with that, Mara is defeated. So there you have, the earth playing this really important role right at the point of awakening. So there's something really important there. The other thing that was in my mind was the legend a few weeks later from that, of the legend of Muchalinda. So the story goes that after the Buddha's awakening, he remains around that grove, or even remains sitting around the roots of the Bodhi tree, and he expresses gratitude to the tree, and he just sits for this long period of time, just simply absorbing the kind of newness, the complete freshness of the awakened mind, of the awakened experience. He's just letting it sort of percolate to every corner of his being. And he does this for 7 weeks. But halfway through the 7th week, the blue sky begins to fill with clouds, begins to darken, and the sky, the clouds get heavier and darker, and a great storm arises, and it begins to rain. And not just ordinary rain, but monsoon rain. So within no time, even all the leaves of the trees above the Buddha are already saturated. And at this point, from the dark undergrowth, there's a rustling, and a figure emerges, and it's this great serpent, the Serpent King, no less, Muchalinda. And Muchalinda arises, and he slithers his great body towards the Buddha, and he coils himself 7 times around the Buddha's body, and then above the Buddha's head he places his own great hooded head. So in this way he protects the Buddha from the torrents of water that pour down and down through the leaves of the Bodhi tree. And there he remains for as long as it rains, because it rains and it rains and it rains. And as long as it rains, there Muchalinda stays, allowing the Buddha to remain in this state of deep meditation and absorption. And after some time, the rains cease, and Muchalinda only then uncoils himself, and he slithers to a point just in front of the Buddha, and there he transforms himself into this beautiful young man who bows in reverence to the Buddha, and then departs. Okay, so this is quite a beautiful myth around the Buddha, the Buddha's enlightenment. Again, something from the earth arising. I quite like to sort of imagine in that myth, imagine what it's actually, imagine yourself in the position of the Buddha. You're deep in meditation, and then this almighty creature rises up from the earth and wraps itself around you. Can you imagine the sort of the smell of that, even, or the feel of just having this body around you, this sense of being protected from the rain? It's a really kind of rich image. So Sangharakshita talks about that image in terms of Muchalinda being he's a Naga, a Naga, one of these sort of mythical serpent beings who we get in Buddhist legend and in Buddha field. All Buddha fields have a Naga. But the significance of Nagas is that they represent the deep unconscious. And it's reinforced here by the presence of water in the form of the rain. Water is also a symbol of the sort of deep unconscious mind. In a literal sense, here you have the forces of nature arising to protect the awakening mind. and that mind being in harmony with the forces of nature. But on a symbolic level, there's this sort of deep sense of this representing the Buddha, a deep integration of the Buddha's unconsciousness as that awakening unfolds in his body. So that's sort of one way of thinking about this myth. It's the power of aligning ourselves with nature, accessing the sort of our deep unconscious. However, perhaps we can take it even a little bit further. Just drawing on another thing that Sangharakshita said, and that is the power of the universe being alive, the idea that everything is alive. So at some point Sangharakshita writes, one needs to see things as alive rather than dead. It's as though when one experiences more life within oneself, one feels the life in other things, even so-called inanimate things. You feel that everything is alive, that the universe is alive. You feel that it is alive because you are alive yourself. You have empathy with what is alive. Okay. So he talks about this as being a kind of essential part of our Buddhist practice. That certainly, if we have a choice between thinking that the universe is inanimate, that just, thinking that it's inert, dead, in a way, that's a real obstacle. That's a real obstacle to our practice. That it's more helpful to us to just think of everything as being living in the same way as we are. Even stones, even water, even plastic. Which means instantly that we're never not surrounded by nature. Sort of putting these ideas together, putting this idea of nature as sort of symbolizing our deepest unconscious, and this idea that, well, actually everything's alive. Water's alive, the rain's alive. It's not so much just that, that nature kind of symbolizes our deep unconscious. It's that nature is our deep unconscious. That the two are actually not separate. They're not separate. So it's not just symbolism. When Muchalinda encoils himself around the Buddha, in a way, it's not just a symbolism of a kind of internal psychological event in the Buddha's mind. There's something going on. There's a sort of deep intimacy between inner and outer. And in a way, a sort of, a not separateness. It puts me in mind of a favourite phrase from William Blake, which you might have come across. Everything that lives is holy. So again, throw that into the mix, and it means that everything is sacred. Everything that lives is holy. Dogen, the 13th century Japanese Zen monk who knew a thing or two. So way back then, he articulates something along these lines. He says, I have come to realize that mind is no other than mountains and rivers and the great wide earth, the sun and the moon and stars. Okay, that's Dogen. Kind of hundreds of years ahead of his time in terms of ecological kind of thinking. I have come to realize that mind is no other than mountains and rivers and the great wide earth, the sun and the moon and the stars. So to meditate in nature, to meditate in sort of living nature, is in a way, it's to meditate in our greater body. Okay, so we might already have an experience of, if you've been meditating a while, of the strength that can come from just really being aware of your body. That, you know, sometimes it feels like that if you meditate in that very grounded way, if you're aware of, you know, your body right down to your sort of guts and, you know, all of yourself, that that brings with it a sort of strength and a sort of wisdom and a sort of depth. So in a way, if we're meditating in our greater body, then it sort of makes sense that something similar arises. That just, you know, like a greater body awareness, a greater body wisdom might arise. And certainly, you know, the Buddha's experience, as it's described, that seems to be what it's pointing to. So the question is, however, how do we get to that point? I think, like many people in our culture, when I came to Buddhism, you know, I'd already kind of taken in quite a lot of our kind of culturally inherited materialism, a very kind of actually quite an outdated scientific worldview, and an assumption that carried with it an assumption that the universe is mostly dead, mostly inanimate. And, you know, I was aware of, particularly at Buddhafield, of people talking about, you know, elves and fairies and stuff like that, that nature of being alive, literally alive, not just symbolically, not just stories, but literally alive, and people experiencing this. But in a way, you can't, you know, I felt, well, I can't just take on that belief. If I decide to believe in elves and fairies, you know, and they're there in the accounts of the Buddha's life, you know, unless that's rooted in some sort of experience, then it's just going to get a bit hollow after a while, a bit sort of just like a flight of fancy. And flights of fancy sort of, they don't have staying power. They sort of run out. So, you know, you can sort of play with them for a while, but then sort of one's experience kicks in. In a way, I suppose for me, you know, because I do feel like I've kind of moved on quite a lot from that early sort of materialism, but for me, that there's been a sort of progression. And I've sort of realised that in a way that progression, that sort of opening to the universe as alive, has actually unfolded through my Buddhist practice. It's almost as if Buddhist practice, it's almost as if Buddhism's actually a nature religion. the irony in that is intended. It is nature. It is a nature religion. Because Buddhist practice, you could hardly design anything or sort of come up with anything better suited to this change of our relationship to nature. So, yeah, this change of relationship, in a way, I think there's sort of like preliminaries that we need to go through. Preliminaries of a sort of basic self-awareness and loving kindness. And it's quite interesting just, hearing or reading about the experience of, geomancers or people who are able to sort of get into sort of telepathic communication with animals, for example. That they tend to say that you need a sort of basic attitude. First of all, you need to be quite sort of integrated and grounded in yourself, because this kind of relationship with nature, a kind of, if you're caught up in a sort of thinking mind, or sort of caught up in a lot of sort of egoistic energy and so on, you haven't got the sort of sensitivity to be aware, to the sort of subtlety of awareness of nature around you. So actually, the good old mindfulness of breathing, it turns out, is a really important preparatory practice to sort of communion with nature in whatever form that might be. So is metta bhavana. Again, those people who sort of make a practice of communing with nature talk about the importance of metta in a couple of ways. First of all, a basic sense of respect towards nature and towards living beings. That we need a kind of basic, at a foundation level, we need a sort of basic recognition that living beings, that non-human living beings, have a place. Going into a forest and hoping to have a sense of oneness with the forest, in a sense, we need, first of all, just a complete respect that this is their place in terms of the trees and so on. So that's a sort of foundation. But then also an actual kind of loving kindness, an actual well-wishing towards beings. It's interesting, those very early suttas in the Buddha's life, the Metta Sutta. The Metta Sutta was actually written apparently in response to monks experiencing fear in the forest, and it seems that an attitude of kindness could actually change that relationship with the beings in the forest. And again, I was hearing recently, or looking at a video of a woman who kind of communicates telepathically with animals, and she talked about sharks. She had this sort of she was sort of tuning into sharks, and she was actually realizing that in this place where there was a lot of problems between sharks and human beings, sharks attacking human beings, a lot of it was because sharks were picking up on the fear and competitiveness of the people, people in the water. And that actually the way to do it, if you're ever, don't quote me on this, but if you're ever so surrounded by sharks, try metta. She was saying that actually that can sort of change the dynamic completely. Just our sort of attitude. So metta bhavana is really, really important. So there's the preliminaries. There's, in a way, stage one, the preliminaries, mindfulness and metta. Okay. Secondly, a kind of deeper practice in relation to nature. So I suppose this is where other aspects of Buddhist practice come in. An idea of going beyond the self. We definitely need to sort of soften our boundaries in nature. To the extent that we do that, in a way, my sense of like the idea of non-self, for example, of going beyond the self. For me, it sort of makes most sense when it's in the context of other beings. It becomes not so much the absence of something, but the fullness of something. And that applies to being around other human beings, but also being around non-human beings, being in nature. The extent that you begin to sort of loosen that sense of the self as being separate, then it's replaced not by an absence of something, but by a kind of vast fullness. That's also a gateway into this sort of deeper experience of nature. To do that, of course, and the third point is that we actually need to be in actual contact with nature. Again, whether that's burying yourself in the soil or just sort of meditating in the forest. And again, so interesting that looking at, throughout Buddhist tradition, but right from the outset, the Buddha, advising people to go off into the forest, go to the roots of a tree. Actually experience that immersion, total immersion, to use a Buddha field expression. I remember once being on a total immersion retreat and meditating in the field and having this very rich experience that at one point it didn't feel like I was meditating. It felt like it was the field meditating. I don't know if that resonates with any of you, but just sometimes you can get a sense of that sort of dissolution of something dissolving around you. But a sense of the bigger body, I suppose. From that point of view, there's something really important, rich here about our relationship to particular places. That experience of being the field meditating, or recently, because I'm in quite an urban part of Newcastle here, so a few weeks ago I sort of just took off to the nearest woodland I could find and meditating, and a similar sort of thing. I felt that I was the wood meditating, the woodland meditating. So something about practice can profoundly change your relationship to place and to places. It's not just sort of abstract, is what I'm saying. It's rooted in particular place, these experiences. And of course, in Buddhism we have the practice. We sort of make sacred spaces, don't we? We sort of build up that association over time. And again, it's not just symbolic, you know, this isn't just symbolism. There's something kind of going on quite a real level, on the level of sort of consciousness of place and our, you know, our own consciousness in practice. One particular thing that came to mind recently was actually at that time when I was meditating in the woodland just recently. I don't know if any of you do a kind of elements practice. I know sometimes you do that at Buddha Field. Even the sort of very basic sense of in meditation of being aware of the physical elements, even just sort of looking at the first 4 of the 6 elements of, you know, earth, water, air, and fire. In a way, you know, I've done that practice quite a lot in the past. It's not one that I find particularly easy, but a kind of interesting way of doing it just sort of arose in my mind, which was instead of sort of thinking of the earth element as inert, as just earth, just the element, thinking of myself as an earth spirit sitting in a wood, surrounded by other earth spirits. So again, it's sort of dissolved that kind of separateness and sort of made me feel accepted and part of that place, because I am an earth spirit. We are an earth spirit. The sort of the mystery of embodiment of, you know, how consciousness is associated with this piece of body that is earth element, or the earth element in this piece of body. You know, it's mysterious in nature, but it's also mysterious in me. You know, consciousness is mysterious. So, you know, I just thinking of myself sitting there as not a sort of separate, aloof figure, but just of one earth spirit amongst other earth spirits. Likewise, one water spirit amongst other water spirits. Or one air spirit, one fire spirit amongst other spirits. So it took away that sort of sense of kind of human chauvinism, as it were. And that had something to do with that sort of sense of dissolution. And it felt very real. It didn't feel fanciful at all to do that. It felt very real. So in a sense, yeah, there's these sort of stages of the preliminaries of integration in metta. There's kind of deeper practice of sort of letting go of separateness. There's another element of what we need to do. There's actual sort of immersion and contact that we need to do. And the final one is in a way something I can only just begin to touch on, and that's the actual sense of communion with nature. I think it begins, part of my own sort of experience of all of this is just trying to sort of be attuned to beauty in nature, to the experience of beauty in nature, which can take all sorts of forms. It can be very awe-inspiring beauty. It can just be moments of aesthetic delight, or there can be moments of you know, just profoundly feeling a kind of oneness with the landscape, or with the ocean, or whatever. But yeah, there's something about just paying attention to those and not just sort of dismissing them, or not just sort of shrugging the shoulders. Of course, you know, it's a very important part of all of this is that we can't grasp after experience, but don't just dismiss them either. These moments of beauty, we might even sort of think of them as moments of communication with nature. moments of truth coming through, of nature actually communicating truth to us. Or, you know, moments of wisdom being communicated, perhaps not in ways that you could express or verbalize. But, you know, but beauty is truth apprehended through the senses. So maybe, you know, if we want to sort of understand beauty or understand nature or what nature is saying to us, then beauty is perhaps one of the languages that might be being we might need to attend to. So yes, I suppose, you know, here I am at a Buddha field thing, talking about the preciousness of practicing in nature and what we can gain from it. So to those of you who are actually involved in Buddha field or on the team in Buddha field, you know, take this as a sort of well, just an affirmation of how precious what you're doing is. You know, that the act of sort of creating spaces where people can come together to do this is, you know, I do think it's profoundly significant. It's something that's really sort of needed in the world at the moment. That, you know, thinking about you know, the kind of wider response of the environmental movement, you know, whatever we're doing as part of that. That something of that depth is really, really needed. That sometimes a kind of response to nature, that in a way we need to kind of go beyond sometimes the merely rational, not to be anti-rational, but we need to somehow sort of go to kind of depths that go deeper than a merely kind of rational response, or responding to events in the world merely on their own terms. You know, although sometimes there's nothing wrong with doing that. But there's something, you know, as Buddhists that we have to offer here, which is actually real connection, which is actually a completely new kind of story about who and what we are in relation to nature. And that's, you know, that's a very powerful thing. And it means sometimes that what we need to do is take our sort of response to the world, take our response to what's going on, all the sort of pain that we might feel, but really sit with it in our depths, in the depths of meditation. And that's when the alchemy arises. That's when something unexpected might arise. And I don't know what that might be. You know, you can't theorize about this. You can't predict it. And like I said, you can't sort of prove that this is a sort of helpful response to the environmental crisis. But nevertheless, I think it is. I just think I think it is. But we have to sort of explore that for ourselves. So I think I've probably done enough talking for now. As I say, I'm just quite interested to hear, in a way, your own sort of sense of this. You know, whether a lot of you, I know, have practiced a lot in nature. A lot of you more than I have. But in a sense, you know, do you feel a kind of richness? Do you feel something kind of welling up, as it were, a kind of wisdom and strength through practicing in nature? So what I'm going to suggest that we do for now is to break into groups. And Jyoti is going to post some questions to each group, so that what I'd like you to just have a think about, to share, is yeah, I've lost the questions now. Yeah, do I find that meditating amongst trees and natural elements, do I find it different from sort of meditating in a room somewhere, in more artificial place? If so, in what way? Secondly, what does it mean to me to experience the universe as alive? Do I, and in what way? And thirdly, yeah, do you feel sustained by deep forces in nature? Is that part of your experience? How does it manifest? Okay, so we'll break into groups, shall we say, for 15 minutes? So you've got, if there's groups of 3, that's like 5 minutes per person if you do it that way. Okay. Just to sort of emphasize the importance that this sort of connection isn't something that can be forced. I think that's quite, again, it's an aspect of metta towards nature that we're not sort of grasping. We're not grasping after a sort of experience. And for me, what I'd like to move increasingly towards is just practice in nature. Is in a way just getting on with one's Buddhist practice, but doing it in relationship to the natural world, and sort of just having the confidence that something arises from that. Again, I think it can be a bit problematic if we're trying to get to get something. But yeah, just the act of immersing ourselves in nature and practice, and Buddhist practice, it has an effect. What I'd like to do just for the last few minutes, I sort of mentioned when I was talking about the elements practice, this sort of particular take, which you might have done before, I don't know, but instead of thinking of the elements in a sort of inert language, using the language of earth, spirit, and so on. So I think probably all of you are in rooms rather than forests at the moment. It's not very practical to get on Zoom in a forest, but nevertheless, perhaps we could just, nature is out there. It's a question of awareness, I suppose, and nature is in the room as well. The room itself is nature. So I'll just lead us through a very, very sort of brief reflection on that, and then perhaps at some point in your own time, next time you get the opportunity to actually meditate in nature, you could try it out. Okay, so just sitting in meditation posture. Perhaps just taking a few breaths, grounding yourself. Connecting with the earth below. Sense of kindly awareness to yourself. Just being aware of the space that you're in. Even though it's a room, thinking of it as alive. thinking of it with kindness. So being conscious of the earth element in your body and the earth element in the room. Just reflecting, I am an earth spirit amongst earth spirits. Being aware of the water element in your body and the water element in your surroundings. And reflecting, I am a water spirit amongst water spirits. Being aware of the air element in your body and the air element in your surroundings. Reflecting, I am an air spirit amongst air spirits. Being aware of the fire element in your own body in the form of energy and the fire element in your surroundings. I am a fire spirit amongst fire spirits. So I'm just going to finish by reading a poem by Adrian Mitchell, and the title of the poem is William Blake Says, "Everything that lives is holy." Long live the child. Long live the mother and father. Long live the people. Long live this wounded planet. Long live the good milk of the air. Long live the spawning rivers and the mothering oceans. Long live the juice of the grass and all the determined greenery of the globe. Long live the elephants and the seahorses, the hummingbirds and the gorillas, the dogs and cats and field mice, all the surviving animals, our innocent sisters and brothers. Long live the earth, deeper than all our thinking. We have done enough killing. Long live the man, long live the woman, who use both courage and compassion. Long live their children. Okay, so that'll conclude us for this evening.